Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 425 for April 21st, 2025. Got a new show for you this week. Plenty of fun topics to cover. Most of them not good, but that is kind of the way most of this stuff goes. Real quick, before we get to that, a couple sort of PSAs. First of all, there's been some Apple updates out. It's the smaller point release updates, but they do have some security vulnerability fixes for vulnerabilities that have been exploited in the field. So make sure you get your Apple devices updated, like all of them. And also just want to remind you that the Dragon Challenge Coin promotion is still going on. It will go to the end of this month. So you've got, 10 days or so left to grab one of these super cool, highly collectible, security enhancing Dragon Challenge coins. If you haven't checked these out, go to fdsd.me/promo425, as in April of 2025, and you'll get the full information there. And we've already gotten some new patrons, so welcome to you folks. Thank you very much for becoming patrons. The first round of challenge coins should have actually arrived already. I think I looked at the delivery information. You should have all gotten them before this show airs. And hey, if you post it on social media and tag me, I will be sure to like and repost. All right, so we have a new show for you. First, I've got an update for the Apple UK data privacy thing that is thankfully being made public. I've got an article from Consumer Reports about how many companies are ignoring people's opt-out requests. Waymo, the automated taxi service that is owned by Google, has cameras on the inside of its vehicles, which shouldn't be a surprise to you. But they are now saying that they're going to be using some of that video from inside their vehicles to train their AI models. You can opt out, but you have to opt out. It's not an opt-in thing. A U.S. lab testing provider has exposed the health data of about 1.6 million people. Hertz also has suffered a data breach, including, in some cases, credit card details. I have an article from The Guardian about how there's some international organization having to do with airline flights and how the processes work at airports, and they are proposing some new solutions that mean you don't have to carry boarding passes anymore. You can just check in with your face. Of course, this is something that has already been trialing at several airports that I've seen. But they're actually wanting to, instead of having a third party do this, they want this to be the way things work for all airports, which has some good parts and then has some creepy parts. San Francisco has a new surveillance hub that is supposedly dropping crime quite a bit, but at the cost of much, much more surveillance. The war between Russia and Ukraine, of course, is horrific, as all wars are. But Ukraine is using a lot of drones. This is something that we talked about with Nick Weaver last year. If you missed that episode, it's worth going back to check that one out. But there's some new twists to how this is all working that is going to probably change the state of warfare forever, that I think is interesting, despite the fact that it's coming from a horrific event. And finally, some good news. A judge has ruled that blanket search of cell tower data is unconstitutional. It hasn't gone all the way to the Supreme Court yet, but it will, and honestly, it needs to. And then I've got my tip of the week. I had a listener reach out to me very concerned about travel and privacy, and rightfully so. And we went back and forth with some long emails on this, and I decided I needed to kind of address this. So we're going to talk about the current state of affairs for your data and your devices while traveling internationally. So, lots to talk about. Let's get to it. All right, first up, we have an update from the UK about the trial between Apple and the Home Office over the back door that they have requested in Apple's advanced data protection. We weren't supposed to know about this at all. Somehow it leaked, which is a good thing because now we get to have a public debate about it. And the BBC has this update. A judge has sided with a coalition of civil liberties groups and news organizations, including the BBC, and has ruled a legal row between the UK government and Apple over data privacy cannot be held in secret. The Home Office wants the right to be able to access information secured by Apple's Advanced Data Protection, or ADP system, citing powers given it under the Investigatory Powers Act, which we lovingly call the Snoopers Charter. At the moment, Apple has no such capability. Such data can only be accessed by the user. which is, by the way, the whole point, and says it does not want to create what it calls a back door into ADP because of concerns it would eventually be exploited by hackers and criminals. The government's request prompted fierce criticism from privacy campaigners and some U.S. politicians. In February, Apple pulled ADP from the UK, and in March, it launched legal proceedings against the government in a case which is being heard by the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. The government argued it would damage national security if the nature of the legal action and the parties to it were made public, what are known as the bare details of the case. In a ruling published on Monday morning, and this was, I think, last week, the tribunal rejected that request, pointing to the extensive media reporting of the row and highlighting the legal principle of open justice. And this is a quote from the court. Quote, "It would have been a truly extraordinary step to conduct a hearing entirely in secret without any public revelation of the fact that a hearing was taking place. For the reasons that are set out in our private judgment, we do not accept that the revelation of the bare details of the case would be damaging to the public interest or prejudicial to national security," unquote. Civil and digital rights organizations in the UK, which criticized the Home Office request, have welcomed Monday's rulings. They, along with news organizations, including the BBC, made legal representations for the case to be heard in public. And this is a quote from Jim Killock, Executive Director of Open Rights Group. And Jim says, quote, "This is bigger than UK and Apple. The court's judgment will have implications for the privacy and security of millions of people around the world," unquote. And I'll circle back to that here in a minute. The Open Rights Group campaigned alongside Big Brother Watch and Index on Censorship against the proposal to hold the hearing in secret. Big Brother Watch interim director Rebecca Vincent said the judgment is, quote, "effectively chipping away at the pervasive climate of secrecy surrounding the Investigatory Power Tribunal's consideration of the Apple case. The Home Office's order to break encryption represents a massive attack on the privacy rights of millions of British Apple users, which is a matter of significant public interest and must not be considered behind closed doors," unquote. So that's fantastic. This stuff should absolutely be debated in the light of day. We have similar stuff here in the USA with the FISA court. I understand the need for some secrecy when it comes to national security, but we've gone over the top with that, and it puts this stuff behind the scenes where we, as citizens who vote on our representatives to make these kinds of laws, don't even know what's going on, and that can't work. That is not how democracy works. So it said this was affect millions of people around the world, and it was bigger than Apple in the UK. That's because the UK didn't just want access to the data of Apple users from the UK. They wanted access to every Apple user around the world. And again, the way this was supposed to play out is we were never supposed to know this was happening. I would love to find out who leaked this, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I'm just glad that they did it. All right, next up, a short one here from Consumer Reports, but it has some interesting things that we haven't talked about for a while, so I thought it would be good to bring this up. And it's about companies ignoring opt-out requests, but these are not maybe the way you're thinking about opt-out requests. So here we go. Today, Consumer Reports and researchers from Wesleyan University released findings from a joint study that examines how companies are complying with opt-out requests sent by universal opt-out mechanisms, such as Global Privacy Control, or GPC. Universal opt-out mechanisms such as GPC allow consumers to restrict companies from selling or sharing their personal data for targeted advertising and are in many ways the core consumer protection under current state comprehensive privacy laws. As it stands, 19 states have comprehensive state privacy laws, making up approximately 43% of the country's population. The study examined 40 online retailers and found that many of them appeared to be ignoring opt-out requests under state privacy laws. 12 of them, or about 30%, appeared to be serving retargeted advertisements on other websites despite receiving GPC opt-out requests. In practical terms, this means that in some cases, consumers' personal data may be sold or shared with third parties even when they've taken the appropriate steps to protect themselves. This study highlights the need for more aggressive enforcement of existing privacy laws. The report also underscores that the state attorneys general need more resources to enforce these laws, and that individuals harmed by privacy violations should have the right to take action through a private right of action. Okay, so this covers a lot of things. Let me hit that last paragraph first, because there's like 3 points in there that are crucial. First of all, we need to understand that just because we've made a law restricting something doesn't mean that's enough. We need other things to go with that for that to have any value, first of all, we need to enforce the law. It's not a guarantee that laws will be enforced. For example, there is a federal law in the United States against marijuana. It's prohibited, and yet we have chosen not to enforce that because a lot of states have legalized it. And the federal law trumps the state laws. We could be enforcing that, but the federal government has chosen not to. There's an example of a law that's on the books that is effectively toothless because it's not being enforced. It's not uncommon for these other laws to not be enforced either because the current administration has instructed the Department of Justice to overlook them and not enforce them. That is going on today in other ways. But also because a lot of times, in this case, these are state laws, and it usually falls to the state attorney general's office to enforce the laws, just like, basically the state level of the Department of Justice. And they have limited resources, and so sometimes they don't pursue these cases. Even though laws were broken, they've got better things to do with their limited resources. And so finally, that leads us to why a lot of people who fight for privacy laws want these laws to contain what's called a private right of action, which means that you don't have to go to the state attorney general and rely on them to sue on your behalf. You can, as an individual, get yourself a lawyer and say, this law has been violated, and I was the one who is the victim of that violation, and I'm going to sue you. Now, understandably, companies and their lobbyists fight really hard against all of these things. If they can't prevent the law from being created in the first place and getting it passed, they could still chip away at the law's effectiveness through doing these other things as well, and they do. And one of the things they fight really hard against is this private right to action, because they don't want to be open to lawsuits from just any old individual. They want a centralized thing through the state attorney general office because they know that a lot of times that won't even happen. So there's that aspect of this story. But the other thing I wanted to mention is this whole global privacy control thing. You might remember several years ago, we had this thing called Do Not Track. It was this brilliant notion that in your web browser, you could, through a standardized mechanism, behind the scenes, you don't see this, but when you're making a request, and by making a request, that means you clicked a link or you went to a website, and behind the scenes, your browser sends a request for that site off to the server, and the site returns the HTML code that shows up as the website. As part of that process, one of the headers in the invisible things that you don't see that are happening behind the scenes, there's a notation there that says, hey, this person has checked the box on the browser that says do not track. They do not wish to be tracked. Please honor this. Well, that was ignored a long time ago for a lot of reasons I'm not going to get into, but it's kind of come back in the form of this new thing called global privacy control. It's a similar idea, just implemented in a new way, and crucially, it was implemented at the time when privacy laws were coming into effect, and they could point to that one thing and say, hey, if you see this signal, if this box is checked, if the user in their browser went and set this up, then they're going to send this to every website they go to, and you better listen to this because there's a privacy law in the state, and you need to respect that. This is the user saying, I don't want to be tracked, and you, therefore, according to our privacy law, must respect that and stop tracking them. What this article is saying is a lot of companies doesn't look like they're doing that. So this is your reminder that, A, this thing exists, global privacy control. You can turn it on at any time. I think every major browser supports it. I have an article, which I've linked to in the show notes, that will tell you how to do it and to make sure that it's actually working. So you'll go and turn it on in your browser, and then if you go to the special website, it will actually tell you at the top, yes, I've got your signal, it's working, you're good to go. And even if you don't yet live in a state with a privacy law where this must be respected, I still encourage you to turn it on because it will tell all these websites that, hey, I don't want to be tracked. And as soon as some law that will apply to you goes into effect, you're already covered and this will just start working. All right, next up, this is from TechCrunch, and it's about, more creepy AI stuff. Waymo is preparing to use data from its robo-taxis, including video from interior cameras tied to rider identities, to train generative AI models, according to an unreleased version of its privacy policy found by researcher Jane Manchin Wong, raising fresh questions about how much of a rider's behavior inside autonomous vehicles could be repurposed for AI training. The draft language also reveals Waymo may also share rider data to personalize ads. This isn't new. Waymo already collects personal data to improve services and for advertising purposes per its existing privacy policy. What will change when this feature is released is that riders will have an opportunity to opt out of having their personal information sold, shared, or used for AI training. And this is a quote from Julia Elena, is a Waymo spokesperson. And Julia says, quote, "The feature, which is still under development, will not introduce any changes to Waymo's privacy policy, but rather will offer riders an opportunity to opt out of data collection for machine learning training purposes," unquote. And then a snippet here of this privacy policy update that apparently hasn't been released yet says, quote, "Waymo may share data to improve and analyze its functionality and to tailor products, services, ads, and offers to your interests. You can opt out of sharing your information with third parties unless it's necessary to the functioning of the service," unquote. And let's face it, this is what all the privacy policies are saying. I mean, it's this kind of vague language with a lot of leeway and loopholes. Okay, back to the article. That language is standard in today's world, yeah. Bringing cameras into the mix is what ratchets up the creepiness factor. And again, another snippet from this unreleased privacy update says, quote, "Opt out of Waymo or its affiliates using your personal information, including interior camera data associated with your identity, for training generative AI," unquote. Helena noted that Waymo uses personal data to train AI models for safety, making sure cars are clean, find lost items, provide help in case of emergency, check that in-car rules are being followed, like, probably no smoking, and generally improve products and services. And this is another quote from Helena, quote, "Any data Waymo collects will adhere to the Waymo One privacy policy. That policy explicitly states Waymo will not share personal information we collect through our products and services with other alphabet companies for them to use for any purpose other than with a user's consent in connection with providing services to Waymo or as otherwise described in the privacy policy's sharing section," unquote. Other alphabet companies working on AI include Google and DeepMind. When asked whether Waymo will alert riders about the ability to opt out when the feature is live, or whether users will have to hunt through the app to find it themselves, Elena said the company has not yet finalized its notification or deployment plans. So, yeah, I'm not sure what else to mention about this other than, yeah, this is happening. Somehow, some way, you are giving consent when you do this, and I bet you don't even know that you're doing it. It's probably something dumb like a pop-up right before you're trying to book a Waymo saying, by continuing to use this app, you agree to the new and updated privacy policy, which you've definitely read. Click here to say okay. And of course, you just say, yeah, okay, whatever. I need to book a ride. Notice and consent is a complete farce. So whenever these things say, we only do it if you give us permission, you should already be shaking your head and disbelieving it. So again, just to kind of summarize what's going on here is these are robo-taxis. These are automated driverless taxis. They are functioning right now in cities around the U.S., primarily I think in San Francisco, but I think maybe also Austin, Texas. And you call a taxi, and this car shows up with nobody in it, and you get in, and then the car takes you to your destination. I mean, as a tech person, that's really cool. That's the future. Like, I want that, right? And more than likely, these drivers, in most ways, under most circumstances, are going to be better drivers than humans, though we still have a ways to go on that. Anyway, the point is now that these things have got cameras on the inside, which, I understand if there's probably security reasons for that. They probably want to have the ability to record that in case something goes horribly wrong. But what they're also doing with that data is learning about you. They know who's in the car. You booked the vehicle. They know your name. And so when you get in the car, now they know your face. Who knows what they're going to use that for? And they're taking video of what you're doing in the car, potentially recording what you say, potentially transcribing what you say and saving that. There was actually another story I didn't have time to include this week about Lyft, who is going to be starting to record audio from inside your vehicle, quote unquote, for security purposes in case something goes wrong. But in that article, somehow, some way, that conversation that they had in the vehicle with their Lyft driver was recorded, transcribed, and then emailed to one of the people in the car. And they're like, what? Where'd this come from? I didn't know I was being recorded. So, again, I don't know how we fix this without regulation. I mean, these companies are just going to do this because they can. Why wouldn't they? All right, we got a couple data breaches to talk about here. This first one's from Bleeping Computer. Laboratory Services Cooperative, or LSC, has released a statement informing it suffered a data breach where hackers stole sensitive information on roughly 1.6 million people from its systems. LSC is a Seattle-based nonprofit organization that provides centralized laboratory services to its member affiliates, including select Planned Parenthood centers. It plays a crucial role within its niche, supporting organizations in the reproductive health services across more than 35 U.S. states handling sensitive lab testing, billing, and personal data. The organization published yesterday, probably last week or 2 weeks ago, a notice of security incident caused by a threat actor that breached its networks in October 2024 and stole data. This is from the notice, quote, "On October 27, 2024, LSC identified suspicious activity within its network. In response, LSC immediately engaged third-party cybersecurity specialists to determine the nature and scope of the incident and notified federal law enforcement. The investigation revealed that an unauthorized third party gained access to portions of LSC's network and accessed or removed certain files belonging to LSC," unquote. The information exposed for each individual varies and may include one or more of the following data types. First, personal identifiers. That would be full name, social security number, driver's license or passport number, date of birth, and government-issued IDs. Second, medical info, dates of service, diagnoses, treatments, lab results, provider, and facility details. 3, insurance info, plan type, insurer, and member group ID numbers. And finally, fourth, billing and financial data, claims, billing details, bank and payment card info. According to a filing submitted to the Maine's AG office, or Attorney General office, the data breach impacts 1.6 million people. The breach mainly affects individuals who had lab tests done through select Planned Parenthood centers that use the LSC for their testing. More information about the impacted centers is available on this FAQ page, which is a link, and by calling LSC. So obviously, if you want to click that link, go to the show notes, find this article, and it will be in there. While the organization can confirm which centers were impacted, validating impact on the level of individuals is not provided due to privacy reasons. LSC says the investigation into the security incident is ongoing, and external cybersecurity experts also monitor the dark web for data leaks related to the breach. As of yet, no such exposure has occurred on dark web markets, forums, or extortion portals. Potentially affected individuals are encouraged to use the free credit monitoring and medical identity protection services covered by LSC for 12 or 24 months, depending on their state. In other words, it's mandated by certain states, and each state has different mandates. The deadline to enroll is July 14th, 2025. For underage individuals with no social security number or credit, a separate monitoring and protection service will be offered called Minor Defense. That's MINOR, underage, minor. Although Planned Parenthood was not directly responsible for the data exposure this time, customers of the healthcare organization had their data exposed for a second time in 2024 following a Ransom Hub ransomware attack in August of 2024. So I guess they're implying that that was their fault. I don't know. It's not, as we've talked about on the show before, it can be very difficult to fight off ransomware attacks. So again, this just goes to underscore our situation right now with data, right? It's not just the fact that you went to Planned Parenthood and you expect Planned Parenthood to take care of your data. They don't do everything in-house. They contract with third parties to manage a lot of this stuff because they can't, afford to spin up a whole unit within Planned Parenthood to do this sort of thing. So they contract it out to third parties, and then the third parties get targeted. We don't know yet, how that third party was attacked in this case, whether it was lax security on the part of LSC or what. If I happen to see something, I'll try to remember to bring it up. But I definitely want to make sure that if this might affect one of you or somebody that you know about this, so you can check into it. But also, just generally speaking, this stuff is happening, and we are not doing a good job of protecting our data. And this is really sensitive data. Our next article is from 9to5Mac, and it's about another data breach, this time with Hertz. Car rental company Hertz says that the personal data of an unspecified number of customers was stolen, and that this includes name, contact information, date of birth, credit card information, and driver's license information. While the company has not revealed the scale of the security breach, it appears to be a very substantial one, affecting customers in the US, Canada, UK, EU, and Australia. It says that the breach occurred in October and November of last year via one of its IT partners, and it became aware of it in February, but only completed its data analysis this month. And this appears to be a quote from Hertz. On February 10th, 2025, we confirmed that Hertz data was acquired by an unauthorized third party that we understand exploited zero-day vulnerabilities with Clio's platform. I'm not sure what Clio is. In October of 2024 and December of 2024, Hertz immediately began analyzing the data to determine the scope of the event and to identify individuals whose personal information may have been impacted. We completed this data analysis on April 2nd, 2024, and concluded that the personal information involved in this event may include the following, and I just read that off to you. A very small number of individuals may have had their Social Security or other government identification numbers, passport information, Medicare or Medicaid ID associated with workers' compensation claims, or injury-related information associated with the vehicle accident claims impacted by the event. And that's the end of the quote from Hertz. Hertz says it has informed law enforcement and is in the process of reporting the event to relevant regulators. The company says that while it is not yet aware of any resulting fraud, customers should be vigilant for misuse of their information. It's offering 2 years of free identity theft monitoring to all of those affected. And I'm sure you've been contacted about this if you were affected already, but if not, there is a link here in the show notes to set up that service. Given a legal requirement to disclose data breaches within 3 days in the EU and within 4 days in the US, it's unclear why the company is only now revealing this and is somehow still in the process of informing regulators. If you are a Hertz customer and have no plans to apply for credit in the near future, you may wish to take the precaution of freezing your credit. This should prevent anyone stealing your identity to apply for loans and payment cards in your name, as all applications should be declined. So yeah, I'll just say this again. If you have not already frozen your credit, you should do so. It's free. It's easy. You can thaw it as needed for when you need to apply for new credit. It is just a very simple, easy button, semi-solution for preventing identity theft. It doesn't prevent everything, but it does prevent new credit from being issued in your name. So if you've not done that, you should absolutely do that. I've got an article on this. If you go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, search on freezing your credit, and you'll find the article that explains everything you need to do. All right, next up, this is from The Guardian, and it's about upcoming plans by the International Civil Aviation Organization. I'd never heard of these people. And it's about modernizing the way that we travel. Some of these things are good, and some of these things are a little bit creepy. So anyway, let me read this article. The days of fumbling around for your boarding pass or frantically checking in for a flight on the way to the airport could soon be over under imminent plans to overhaul the way we travel. The International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO, the UN, I guess United Nations body responsible for crafting airline policy, plans to dramatically shake up existing rules for airports and airlines through the introduction of a digital travel credential. This would allow passengers to store passport information on their devices to be used for travel. The changes would come into effect within 3 years, according to the Times. And in this case, that would be the UK Times. So many newspapers around the world called the Times. Anyway, currently those flying must check in, which can be done online or at the airport upon arrival. They are then issued with a boarding pass with a barcode. This is scanned by a passenger at various points throughout the airport, including at the gate before boarding. The changes would make boarding passes and the need to check in for flights obsolete. Instead, flyers will download a Journey Pass to their phone when they book a flight. The pass will automatically be updated if any changes are made to the booking. Passengers will also be able to upload their passports to their phone and travel through airports using their face for verification. Instead of manually checking in, which would let airlines know who intends to board their flights, airlines will instead be alerted when passengers arrive at the airport and their face is scanned. The new technology could spark privacy concerns, but Amadeus, I think this is a company, said it had developed a system where passengers' details were wiped within 15 seconds of each contact with a touch point, such as the pre-security gates. How delays in connecting flights are handled could also change. Under the technology being developed, passengers who miss connecting flights due to delays out of their control could automatically be sent a notification on their phones with details of their new onward flight. Their Journey Pass would automatically update, and they would be allowed to board the new flight. Okay, so the whole Journey Pass thing, yeah, sounds good. Fine, I'm all for it. That sounds much more convenient. honestly, it doesn't sound a whole lot different than what we're already doing now by putting our boarding passes in our phones. Because I think even those now will update with the current gate information as that changes, for example. But yeah, okay. I mean, I'm all for that. That's fine. The gross part here is the facial recognition part. So I understand that would be convenient. And they say that, so it scans your face and then verifies who you are and then throws that scan away. But what is it checking against? Where it's got to be comparing the face that it scanned with faces in a database. Which database is that? Where are all my faces stored? How did that face get stored? Who controls whose face is stored in there? Who has access to those faces? Is it just the TSA? Is it also the airline? Maybe the airport? What about vendors? There's a lot of details that we need to work out here that could be bad, and there could be a slippery slope here where it starts off good and ends up bad. Facial recognition is not a silver bullet. We were trying to make it so in a lot of different places. We got to be really careful with this. And again, we got to be careful about the frameworks that must be set up in order for it to work. Has a lot of privacy implications as well. All right, this next one is from CBS News, and it's about a new surveillance hub being used by the San Francisco police, which sounds straight out of a movie, like maybe Minority Report. So let me read this, and then we'll talk about it. Tucked away in the bowels of San Francisco's Hall of Justice lies a crime-fighting nerve center bringing the city's police force into the age of changing technology. The San Francisco Police Department said its new Real-Time Investigation Center, also known as RTIC, has assisted in more than 500 arrests since its launch, with officials pointing to the facility as a game changer in reducing crime across the city. And this is a quote from Mayor Daniel Lurie. Quote, "This technology is the future of policing for SFPD officers, using their training and judgment supported by the best tools available to keep our community safe as we continue to fully staff the RTIC, and using drones and first responders will be a force multiplier. It will give officers more support, and it will help ensure that every neighborhood benefits from smarter, faster, and more coordinated public safety," unquote. RTIC is a 24/7 operations center where teams of analysts monitor live surveillance feeds, license plate readers, and drone footage to guide officers on the ground in real time. According to the SFPD, the integration of technology is leading to more efficient response times, less paperwork, and a drop in crime. Police Chief Bill Scott credited the center and the technology with a 20% drop in crime from January through April compared to the same period last year, including one of the steepest drops in car theft, which is down 42% this year compared to 2024. Now, I guess it's not clear. Is the crime not happening now, or are they solving those crimes? I'm curious, because if the crimes are not happening, that could be obviously from a lot of different things. And not necessarily some deterrence, like do all the thieves know that this stuff is going on? Anyway, back to the article. This is a quote from Police Chief. "In the last year, the last 3 months, we've had more technological advancements than we've seen in decades. We've been arresting people that have been prolific, people that have really damaged our city and damaged our retail spaces, damaged our reputation, and made people feel unsafe. Those are the people that these officers, these investigators, these analysts, and the collaborative effort of the RTIC has put together to address is getting people who harm other people off our city streets, and I think they've done a fantastic job in doing that," unquote. The deployment of the technology was made possible after voters approved Proposition E in 2024, expanding the department's authority to use emerging technologies such as drones and license plate reading systems. And that's a key point that I'll return to in a minute. Still, not everyone is on board. Privacy advocates, such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, warn that such surveillance methods could quickly spiral into privacy violations. Beryl Lipton, a researcher for EFF, raised concerns about potential misuse. And this is a quote from Beryl, quote, "As more real-time crime centers are being propped up, there is an additional concern about the individual surveillance technologies that are being fed into the crime center, the additional technologies that could be added to the real-time crime center in the future," unquote. SFPD says it's not using generative AI in its procedures, but didn't rule out the use of AI in police work in the future. And for Lipton, that sounds alarm bells. Again, a quote from Lipton, quote, "This evolving use of artificial intelligence to try to make connections between different pieces of data that may or may not actually be there, but we, the public, have no sense for how it's actually being conducted," unquote. The center and its technological partner is also hoping to attract more police talent to the department that remains understaffed by 500 officers. Scott said that the cameras have, at times, proven wrongfully accused people innocent by verifying and tracking the true criminals. Okay, so, sure, that's interesting. Honestly, the key part of this whole article for me really was the fact that this was made possible by the voters approving it. So in this case, the voters have approved it. That is the way this stuff should be done. That's democracy. If the people of this city decide they want to do this, then they at least had a say in this, and hopefully have a future say in, how it might be expanded or used or even curtailed if it gets out of hand. That is kind of the way this thing is supposed to work. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is that human rights are not something that is legislated or voted upon. When you have a right, you just have that right. You don't vote for rights. They're inherent. So there certainly is a right to privacy, which I believe fits that bill, that you can't vote away. So even though there was, a democratic process behind the approval of this technology, it can still run afoul of privacy rights, and we still have to be careful. So I'm surprised this is the first thing like this. This is straight out of all the movies, including Minority Report and Batman. And there were several movies where this was a thing, where all this data input, all these data sources that were out there were all collected and correlated and viewed in a single way by law enforcement and used to fight crime, which I'm sure is a huge help for them doing that. But at the cost of what? Would we be okay if we could reduce crime by 90 or 95% if every one of us had a tracker installed with a camera and a recorder on us that is constantly uploading everything we do, see, or say, or hear to a central cloud that the cops can look at? And I say 90 to 95% because you're still not going to prevent all crime. There are crimes of passion. There are a lot of crimes that are not prevented by the threat of surveillance. And oh, by the way, there will be, bad guys who will start wearing masks more often or find other ways to defeat these technologies. These things aren't perfect. So, where do you draw that line? How do we decide? At least, I guess, in this case, hopefully the electorate was informed about their options, how this stuff worked, where it was going to be deployed, given all the information, and given a choice, and they chose to do it. But we still have to be really careful with this stuff. I am definitely worried that we are going to start leaning on things like AI to replace officers. When, SFPD, according to this article, is short 500 cops that they need. And a lot of technologists and technology companies are right there saying, hey, we could give you technology that is a force multiplier, meaning, you could do more with less in terms of people if you turn it over to computers. In fact, our computers that we are happy to charge you money for and make a big profit on. Anytime you start mixing the profit motive with security and safety, that's usually a bad thing and leads to bad outcomes. But just a heads up, this is probably coming to your neck of the woods as well. Keep an eye out for this in your local town councils and propositions and things, and be ready to vote on this and demand more information from your local representatives and law enforcement when these things inevitably come up. All right, next up, this is from Forbes. And again, I generally don't like to quote Forbes, but every once in a while they've got interesting stuff. This one is about the Russia-Ukraine war and their use of drones, and it's taken an interesting twist. The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine has been defined by the widespread use of innovative technologies that have reshaped the modern battlefield. While cyber warfare was expected to play a prominent role in this conflict, it has been generally overshadowed by the mass fielding of drones and the associated counter-drone systems. However, a recent video posted to social media suggests that Ukrainian drones are now being used to conduct minor cyber operations against Russia. The video, which appears to be of Russian origin, warns about various malware recently discovered on Ukrainian drones that have infected Russian systems. The malware threats mentioned in the video are relatively minor, as they primarily affect the drone itself or the computer it connects to rather than targeting an entire network. According to the Reddit post featuring the video, the variants of malware on the Ukrainian drones are, quote, burning out the USB port, preventing reflashing, or hijacking the repurposed FPV, or first-person view, I think is what that means, camera, and revealing the operator location, unquote. The inclusion of malware is significant as both sides are rapidly competing for an edge in the drone domain. The emerging threat of Ukrainian drone-borne malware infecting Russian computers could force Russia to implement new safety precautions to protect their systems. I would hope so. These measures would hinder Russian updates to their counter-drone technology, which requires extensively studying the internal working of an enemy drone to find its vulnerabilities. As such, this would extend the time frame that Ukrainian forces could effectively use a drone before it becomes obsolete due to Russian counter-drone technology. The malware also appears to be designed to prevent Russia from repurposing captured drones, as one reported variant blocks the drone's hard drive from being re-imaged. Even if re-imaging is possible, another reported variant allows Ukrainian forces to hijack the repurposed drone and potentially locate its operator. The risks associated with this exploitation would limit Russia's desire to reuse captured Ukrainian drones. Both sides face increasing resource constraints, making the ability to repurpose enemy equipment a valuable asset. By preventing Russia from doing so, Ukraine gains a strategic advantage. This tactic highlights how Ukraine is leveraging its strong pre-war information technology sector to counter Russia's advanced military techniques and strong defense industrial base. Before the war, Ukraine's IT sector was thriving with a deep talent pool of software engineers and cybersecurity experts. By embedding malware into their drones, Ukrainian developers have found a way to disrupt Russian counter-drone efforts without requiring additional physical resources, a critical advantage given Ukraine's logistical constraints. If successful, Ukraine may begin integrating malware into other electronic systems to limit Russia's ability to study or reuse them. Further, as Russia adopts additional cybersecurity procedures and more advanced antivirus software, Ukraine could escalate its use of malware, developing more sophisticated codes to disrupt Russian military efforts. Future iterations could go beyond burning out USB ports to directly targeting Russian battlefield networks, exploiting vulnerabilities in command and control systems, and even enabling backdoor access for Ukrainian intelligence. Ukraine's use of malware will likely trigger a new technological competition, mirroring what is currently happening with Ukrainian and Russian drone technology. Russia will likely start implementing similar malware on its drones and equipment, while both sides respond by instituting safety protocols and developing antivirus software to counter the malware. In turn, scientists on both sides will develop more advanced malware to defeat these countermeasures. This ongoing cycle of attack and defense will add a new dimension to the battle for drone supremacy. I just thought that whole thing was fascinating. I had a great interview with Nick Weaver about the use of drones in warfare last year. Maybe I'll put a link in the show notes, but if I don't, you can go back and search for it. That was a really interesting episode as well. So I don't have a whole lot to add to this. I just think that story is fascinating. All right, one more story here, and then I'll get to a quick tip of the week. And this is from 404 Media, and we end on a little bit of good news. A judge in Nevada has ruled that tower dumps, the law enforcement practice of grabbing vast troves of private personal data from cell towers, is unconstitutional. The judge also ruled that the cops could, this one time, still use the evidence they obtained through this unconstitutional search. Cell towers record the location of phones near them about every 7 seconds. When the cops request a tower dump, they ask a telecom provider for numbers and personal information of every single phone connected to a tower during a set period of time. Depending on the area, these tower dumps can return tens of thousands of numbers. Cops have been able to sift through this data to solve crimes, but tower dumps are also a massive privacy violation that flies in the face of the Fourth Amendment, which protects people from unlawful search and seizure. When the cops get a tower dump, they're not just searching and seizing the data of a suspected criminal. They're sifting through the information of everyone who is in the location. A Nevada man, Corey Spurlock, is facing charges related to dealing marijuana and a murder-for-hire scheme. Cops used a tower dump to connect his cell phone with the location of some of the crimes he is accused of. Spurlock's lawyers argued that the tower dump was an unconstitutional search and that the evidence obtained during it should not be. The cops got a warrant to conduct the tower dump, but argued it wasn't technically a quote-unquote search and therefore wasn't subject to the Fourth Amendment. A U.S. district judge rejected this argument but wouldn't suppress the evidence. And this is a quote from this judge, quote, "The court finds that the tower dump is a search and the warrant law enforcement used to get it is a general warrant forbidden under the Fourth Amendment. That said, because the court appears to be the first court within the Ninth Circuit to reach this conclusion, and the good faith exception otherwise applies, the court will not order any evidence suppressed." The judge argued that the officers acted in good faith when they filed the warrant and that they didn't know the search was unconstitutional when they conducted it. According to the judge, the warrant wasn't unconstitutional when a judge issued it. This ruling is the first time the United States Court of Appeals of the Ninth Circuit has ruled on the constitutionality of tower dumps, but it isn't the first time a federal judge has weighed in. One in Mississippi came to the same conclusion in February. A few weeks later, the Department of Justice appealed the ruling. There's a decent chance that one of these cases will wind its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court of the United States will have to make a ruling about tower dumps. The last time the issue was in front of them, they kicked the can back to the lower courts. In 2018, the Supreme Court considered Carpenter v. United States, a case where the FBI used cell phone location data to investigate a series of robberies. The court decided that law enforcement agencies violate the Fourth Amendment when they ask for cell phone location data without a warrant. But the ruling was narrow, and the court declined to rule on the issue of tower dumps. According to the court records for Spurlock's case, the tower dump that caught him captured the private data of 1,686 users. An expert who testified before the court about the dump noted that the, quote, wireless company users whose phones showed up in the tower dump data did not opt in to sharing their location with the wireless provider and indeed could not opt out from appearing in the type of records received in response to the warrant, unquote. Okay, so this obviously still needs to be sorted out at the Supreme Court before we really know how this is going to shake out. But the way the tiered system in the U.S. works, at least in this Ninth Circuit, this is now precedent until, something else comes up. And I think it's the right call. I mean, this is a dragnet search, and that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. There are other types of searches that need to be curtailed like this as well. So it's good that we're having cases around this so that eventually it can reach the Supreme Court. And I can only hope that they decide those cases in the correct manner. So fingers crossed, I'll keep you posted. All right, so there's your news, and now let's get to my tip of the week. And again, I was contacted by one of my listeners who was very concerned about data privacy while traveling internationally. And we went back and forth quite a bit, talking about a lot of very specific issues and techniques that might be used. And it was really difficult. And I myself am going to be doing some international travel here soon. So this was something that has been on my mind as well. And frankly, right now, even though, we've had smartphones since 2006 and people are much more likely to be traveling maybe with laptops and iPads and other devices that not only could contain a lot of very personal data, but would through the internet have access to, like everything, right? And so there's a lot of really thorny legal issues around this. It's really not cut and dried. But I want to call your attention to some things that we do know that might be very eye-opening. So when we're talking about international travel in particular, we're talking about multiple countries potentially with different rules and different jurisdictions. And so what you can expect to happen and what your rights are in any particular situation, there's just a lot of permutations of this. What country are you entering? What country are you from? What country do you have a visa for, or perhaps secondary citizenship with, or a green card in the United States, which is not quite exactly the same as somebody who's born here, though it probably should be. And, then of course, other things like, what kind of devices you have, what you're carrying with you. Already, there's just lots of possible combinations there. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is specifically talking about a U.S. citizen returning to the United States and going through customs at a U.S. border or at the first airport you land in. But a lot of these concepts will apply basically anywhere. But a lot of other common places that, we might travel, the UK, Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, the EU, Australia, for example, have flavors of these same laws and rights. And let me just say at the outset here, I am not a lawyer. I do not give legal advice. If you need legal advice, there are immigration lawyers and other human rights lawyers that will be able to help you. And I have an article about this on my website that has links to some great guides around this that do talk about the laws, and they're written by lawyers and people who know what they're talking about. But I wanted to give you just an idea mostly of how bad this really is, and then give you just a few tips that I've gleaned from some of these other guides. So again, we need to be thinking when we're traveling how much data somebody who had one of our devices unlocked in front of them, potentially, would have access to. And it's basically everything. And it's not just a matter of whether or not they can see something while they have it in their hand. It's also possible that they could make a complete copy of everything on your phone to be reviewed at some later date. Now, generally speaking, if you are entering your country, you're going through the border checkpoint, entering your country, they can't prevent you from coming into your country, generally speaking. Now, they may delay you, they may confiscate your devices, but they can't prevent you from going home. If you're not going home, they can basically deny you entry if they don't, for just about any reason, but one of them being if you don't let them search your devices, for example. And when a lot of our customs and border security laws were written, they did not take this into account. I mean, in those days, maybe they could search your luggage. And so anything you had on your person at that time, might give them some suspicions or might be illegal or whatever. But not everything in your entire life, not every email you've ever sent, not every social media post you've ever had, not being able to log into your doctor's portal, logging into your bank accounts, seeing who you sent money to, checking all your messages, searching your messages, right? It's not even just having to look through them. They could search through them. Our smartphones in particular, but our laptops and tablets and things too, give an amazing view into who we are, not just right now, but in the past. And with all that information, if these border agents are pissed off or having a bad day, or you've rubbed them a wrong way, or they have some weird suspicion about you because of the way you look or something you said or whatever, they have broad authority to search whatever they want. And if they're looking hard enough, with confirmation bias, they can find something. One of my favorite quotes when I talk about this kind of situation is from, it's attributed to Cardinal Richelieu, which I guess there's some debate around that. But anyway, the quote is, "If you give me 6 lines written by the hand of the most honest of men, I will find something in them with which to hang him." Which is basically to say, if I could go through everything you've ever done and all the data, for example, on your phone, I could find something in there suspicious and something that you may have done wrong, or something at least that I can hold you on. And so the upshot of all of that is when we travel, certainly when we're going through border checkpoints, we want to minimize the amount of data that is available for potential searches. So in the United States, and we've talked about it today, we've got the Constitution, and the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. But those rules have exceptions, and one of the major exceptions is at the U.S. border, because when national security comes in, a lot of those rights go out the window. Your Fourth Amendment rights are not nearly as strong when you're trying to come into our country. And here's the other thing that you might not realize, is that those special exceptions to the Fourth Amendment granted to CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol in the United States, they extend 100 miles from the U.S. border. And that's not just like the geographical border, like between the U.S. and Canada. It's also the coastlines. And there's a map in the article I wrote about this on firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com that shows you this 100-mile area. And because of the way our cities are set up, a lot of our major U.S. cities are in that 100-mile range. And if you do the math, that 100-mile border around the coastlines and the north and south borders of the U.S. encompasses almost 2/3 of the entire U.S. population. So it's a bad problem, and it's worse than you thought. So what can you do about this? Well, this is really difficult, and if you're really worried about this, I would suggest you read the guides that I linked to in my article. But honestly, the only foolproof method to make sure that you don't have your devices searched is just to not have your devices. And of course, in the modern world, that sucks, right? Like, how do you not have your phone with you, let alone, maybe a laptop that you might need for work, or a tablet or whatever that would have similar access as your smartphone would. But I mean, the only way to guarantee they can't get to that is for it to not be with you. Because in a lot of these situations, depending on the country, and again, I'm not a lawyer, they can pseudo compel you, if not legally, through just pressure tactics like, hey, look, You're going to miss your plane if you don't let me log into your phone right now. So please unlock your phone and hand it to me. You just would have to assume that's the case. So you need to be thinking about this ahead of time if you're at all worried about this. And I break it down into 3 kind of time periods. First of all, before you ever leave home, like right now, like as you're planning your trip, you need to be thinking about these things and learning about these things, understanding your rights and knowing what you're going to do and plan for that. Because you do not want to be trying to come up with this at the last minute as you're crossing the border and all of a sudden get an angry border guard who is challenging you. And you having to figure out on the fly how you're going to respond to that. So first of all, again, leave as many of your devices home as you can. That's by far the simplest solution. Make sure for any devices you're taking with you, you back up that data. Because if for some reason they confiscate your device and you're allowed to continue, but your device is left behind, or it could be lost or stolen as well, right, when you travel. So you should do this anyway. Make sure all your data is in the cloud or backed up somehow. You should enable full disk encryption. Most smartphones do this today automatically. On your Mac, you want to turn on File Vault. On Windows, if you have access to BitLocker, you should turn that on. Otherwise, look up VeraCrypt. This is all covered in my book. I'm going to have to go through a lot of these very quickly. I can't explain how to do all these things. But you also might want to consider uninstalling any apps you don't absolutely need while you're traveling. Realize that a lot of the information, if it's in the cloud from some of those apps, a lot of those functions and those apps you can access just through a regular web page by logging into that site on the web instead of using the app. You can get to a lot of that data that way, and I recommend you do that whenever you can. So if you don't absolutely need the app itself, most times, since the data is held in the cloud, you could delete the app completely from your phone and delete the data from your phone and then reinstall it at some point later in the future when you're back from your trip, and all that data will just come back. You should sign out of any services you won't be needing during the trip and uninstall the apps if you can. You might want to consider disabling biometric unlocking and require your device to only use a PIN for the time while you're traveling. You should store copies of your travel documents on an encrypted cloud storage in case of your device loss, because then you can go to any web browser and log in and get them. Remove any unnecessary files and any other data that you don't need for your trip from your device. You might want to consider using lockdown mode. This is something that Apple provides. Android will be providing this apparently in Android 16, but that's not out yet. And then again, just look at the stuff ahead of time, understand the situations, read these articles that explain your rights, get familiar with the potential issues here. So that's what you should be doing as you're planning your trip well before you leave. Now, when you're on your trip, there's basically stuff you should do right before and right after a border crossing. So before you get to the border, power down your devices completely. Turn them off. I don't mean put them to sleep. I mean turn them 100% off. Most modern digital devices are the most secure when they're off. They are the second most secure when they're powered up, but you have not yet logged in. So power down the device. If they ask you to turn it on, you can turn it on. If you're forced to unlock it, honestly, all bets are off. That's why we try to remove as much data beforehand as we can. As you're going through this, stay calm, be courteous, and be honest. If they suspect you that you're lying about something or concealing something, that's going to trigger a lot more scrutiny that you do not want. Again, on your device for any apps that you left installed, if there's an option to log out of the cloud service from that app, do that before you go through the border and then log back in when you get through. Keep all your devices with you, like in your carry-on, but not your checked luggage. That way, if there's any inspections are done, that'll probably be done right in front of you. And then if you're at all worried about, like if you're planning to, gosh darn it, if they say unlock your device, I'm going to say no. If you think that you might be resisting this stuff in any way or might be, any cause for trouble, you might also let somebody else know who's not with you that you're about to go through a checkpoint and tell them exactly where you are. So that if for some reason they don't hear from you for a while, they at least know where you last were. So again, whether or not they can force you to unlock your device is really fuzzy. It depends on who you are, where you're going, and lots of other factors. So again, you need to understand what your rights are for where you're going, and you need to decide ahead of time, because you don't want to be doing this under stress at the moment, how you're going to handle it if they ask you to unlock your device. Okay, so let's say you find that you get through the border, which 90% of the time, 95% of the time is probably what's going to happen. So you've covered your butt, you got through the checkpoint, and now you're through. And not you're past the point at which someone is likely to stop you to further inspect your stuff. So at that point, if for some reason they did get into your phone and check on any of your accounts, if you ever entered any passwords, for example, I would change the passwords to any of those accounts just so they, because otherwise they may still have that password, right? So, change passwords for anything you may have accessed or they may have accessed via a password. You can now reinstall any of the apps that you removed, just the ones you need for travel. If anything weird did happen, something that you want to report, before your memory is lost, write down everything you can remember about the incident. If you got the badge number, the name, the description of the person, where you were, which gate, any of that specifics would be good to have written down for future reference. And if you want, you can contact groups in the United States anyway, like the Electronic Frontier Foundation or the ACLU. If you want to file some sort of a suit or just report something bad that happened, they have people that will help you with things like that. And then obviously, if you told somebody that you were about to go through the crossing, you should definitely follow up with them and say, hey, I got through okay, and let them know. So the bottom line here is that it's really messed up. This is just a completely untenable situation, and we have got to fix this. We need better laws around this stuff that take into account the fact that these devices have so much information. There are rules around some of this already. Like, for example, supposedly the CBP, when you give them their device, they're supposed to put your device in airplane mode, meaning that they're supposed to cut themselves off from being able to access anything in the cloud. However, there's still lots of information on your device. Like, it probably still stores a lot of emails and messages and things. Just because it can't talk to the cloud doesn't mean it doesn't already have a lot of that information right there. And currently we have laws that apparently allow a lot of these border agents to, under certain circumstances, completely at their subjective decision, to take your device in the back room and hook it up to special machines that will try to make a complete copy of all the data on your phone, which they could review at a later time. The laws that are in place do not properly contemplate the privacy issues around smartphones and laptops. But even if we get laws, they're not going to be in every country. They're not going to be enforced the right ways. They're not going to be all the same. We still need technological solutions. We could take the steps like I'm talking about, but what I really want, and I hope that Apple and Google are working on this, is we need a travel mode. We need some sort of a one button thing that we can click that does a predetermined set of things. Like a lot of things I just said, like it should offload some data and apps automatically. And I don't mean hide them, I mean offload them. Because if they're just hidden, you could be compelled to show them. You don't even want to have them on you. You want no way to comply with the demand to show these things because, they will find some way to make you do it. And, even if it's just coercion. So we really need a travel mode option that will strip down your device. It will minimize the amount of data and apps on your device and with a one click. It's something that you should be able to do like right before you cross the border, potentially. So I want to be able to do it at short notice, and I want to know that it's going to work. And it should put our phone in the super secure data minimized mode that significantly reduces the amount of data that could be accessed by anybody, including yourself, for some fixed short period of time. And maybe, for example, that you can't undo that until you leave the border or you get to a known good location, like maybe not even until you get home. This is a tricky thing, and some smart people need to think real hard on this, but we need something like this, and they can, refine it over time. But we need some sort of a travel security mode on our devices. But until then, sadly, this is about the best we can do. So again, I've got an article on this that says most of what I just said, but also links out to a lot of really great other resources on this. If you're going to be doing some international travel, I highly recommend that you check this out. It's not an easy thing, but this is what we got. It's not a cut and dry thing. There's not any really good answers, but this is what we've got. So there you have it, your news and your tip of the week. All right, everybody, that'll do it this week. There's not a whole lot more to say. Again, I'll remind you that we have 10 days left in the Dragon Challenge Coin promotion. Go to fdsd.me/promo425 for all the details. These coins are really cool. And you've got about 10 days left if you want to get your hands on one of these puppies. For my top patrons this week, which would include anybody that would qualify for the challenge coin, my Merlin's musings for this week, we're going to talk about those secret yellow printer dots. It is not an urban myth. Those are a real thing. If you print something on a color laser printer, there are very pale yellow dots in patterns on every page you print that will say what printer printed this, the serial number, the date, the time, things like that. Originally, I think it was there for anti-counterfeiting, but it's been used for all sorts of other law enforcement and forensics things. So I wanted to prove to myself that they were there, and in Merlin's Musings this week, we'll talk about how I did that. We've got a whole bunch of great interviews in the pipeline. Next week, we'll be talking with Zach Edwards. That was a really fun interview about the Gravy Analytics data breach and just what these data brokers are doing in general, and a lot of other great stuff. So if you haven't already, subscribe, and then you won't miss any of that. So take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.